Warm welcome to everyone this evening. Remediation, special education, and educational therapy all go hand in hand. They are all part of the special education system. Special education is tailored to meet the needs of students with disabilities. The services and supports one child receives may be very different from what another child receives. It's all about individualization. What's important is giving kids the resources they need to make progress in school. To understand this better and with more clarity, we have with us Meghna Varma, Nandita Paul Saxena, and Sudha Nair, all professionals in their respective fields. We start today with understanding a little more about educational therapy. Educational therapy is a form of therapy used to treat individuals with learning differences, disabilities, and challenges. This form of therapy offers a wide range of intensive interventions that are designed to resolve learners' learning problems. Meghna Varma ma'am did her MBA and worked for the hospitality industry. She has successfully managed and run a kids portfolio studio, Say Cheese as a proprietor, been involved with kids photography. She has volunteered at the Akanksha Foundation for Teach for India movement, conducted fun food workshops and art and craft workshops for children during summer vacations. She has been an educator for more than a decade. Her journey in the field of special education began with her daughter's struggles. She worked at the St. Mary's School as a mainstream teacher for 10 years, simultaneously upskilled herself with courses from National Institute of Learning Development, interned with the director NILD, went to NILD USA to upgrade her qualifications in 2019. At present, she is doing educational therapy with special needs children. Her passion to teach children drives her to know more about how each child learns differently and to teach them the way they learn. Over to you, Meghna ma'am.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Karen, for that introduction. I would like to begin with a brief, just give a little glimpse of how my journey as a educational therapist began. So I began as a mainstream teacher, as Karen mentioned, and it all began with my daughter's school when I started noticing the struggles that she was going through. She had very loving, caring, understanding, and compassionate teachers at that point of time. But I had to change her school, and she got all the support and intervention required in the new school. She progressed, but her struggles didn't end there. And that's when my quest to find out what goes into learning, what goes into teaching special needs children began. I wanted to find out and help her in a way which would be for life. That's when I came across the National Institute of Learning Development in the US, offering these amazing training programs to equip teachers with tools which leave lasting effects on children's learning. Today, she's a confident, independent, and a competent 19-year-old and a young, budding entrepreneur. She is one of my many success stories that that I have to share with people and reach out to as many parents as possible to ensure that they don't go through the struggle that I went through with my child. Just a second, just share my screen. So I would like to give you a little brief on what educational therapy is all about, who is an educational therapist, and what do they do. So to begin with, who is an educational therapist? An educational therapist is an individual who holds a bachelor's or higher degree in the field of education or related field and has has been trained by NILD to work with students who have learning disabilities. They are trained professionals holding NILD professional certification as an educational therapist. NILD educational therapy is accredited by the International Dyslexia Association. An NILD educational therapist is trained over years to work in developing the required cognitive and perceptual skills that are lacking in an individual child. These are skills that are very basic for reading, writing, math, reasoning, thinking, and language. They work at the root cause of learning disabilities. They teach their student how to learn rather than what to learn. In the process of doing so, the student's academic performance improves as a byproduct. What is educational therapy? Educational therapy is a teaching methodology which focuses on developing 4 key components of learning: cognition, perception, emotion, and academics. It is for children 8 years and above. The focus is on individualized or small group intervention to strengthen the root cause of learning difficulties rather than the symptoms. This is done by planning the intervention just a little above the child's functioning. By doing so, it builds the child's confidence, which helps him in becoming competent. Students receive either individual or small group intensive intervention. These sessions include a variety of techniques which are designed to address students' specific areas of difficulty to improve their overall ability to think, reason, and process information. These techniques focus on enhancing basic skill areas such as reading, writing, spelling, math, and applying reasoning skills in each of these areas. Educational therapy is a teamwork between educational therapists, the parent, and the classroom teacher. This is encouraged in order to assess the progress and adjust the educational program for each student accordingly. How and why does educational therapy work? Now, deficits in perception, cognition, and emotion impair the learning process and create uneven academic performance. The learning process is represented by a wall, as you can see on the screen, where perception and cognitive skills form the foundation of the wall. If any of these areas, including visual motor coordination, auditory memory, abstract logical thinking is weak, then academic skills are affected. After cognitive and perceptual deficits are strengthened, confidence grows and the learning process becomes efficient and the students become independent learners. Research has indicated that thinking can be changed through intensive and focused intervention. An educational therapist is trained to develop language and thinking through effective questioning. Students are trained to think for themselves rather than being dependent on the teacher or a parent to think for them. Students are taught to defend their answers and to reflect upon their thinking process. They transition from dependent learners to those who think and reason independently. Strategies learned in NILD educational therapy typically enable a student to remain independent and successful throughout their school years. Now, another question that comes to every parent's mind is my child a candidate for this program? All students who are experiencing obvious frustrations in the area of school performance are potential candidates of NILD educational therapy. Poor spellings, illegible handwriting, inability to express thoughts verbally or in writing, and difficulties with reading and math are common indicators of learning disabilities. A child with these struggles is put through a battery of tests to identify areas of cognitive strengths and patterns of weaknesses. This measures and compares students' potential with their actual performance. Based on initial and annual assessment, an individualized program of educational therapy is designed for each student to stimulate the cognitive functions. The educational therapists work in conjunction with qualified diagnosticians and can assist parents in completing and understanding the educational assessment. There are certain distinct characteristics of educational therapy which I would like all of you to know. This is what makes it different from the mainstream teaching, and it works wonders with tutoring or special education, remediation, and all of it. In NILD educational therapy uses interactive language. The therapy sessions are interactive process between the student and the educational therapist. Clear and oral responses are expected as language directs the thinking. The NILD educational therapy uses dynamic intervention. The program is not scripted. The therapist uses various materials. Students' response direct the questioning, which encourages reflection and independent answers. This is done to develop core academic skills and higher order thinking. This is non-tutorial program. The students learn through the process and the content. This is again done through the use of explicit interactive instructions. Students with LD do not learn easily or incidentally. They need explicit intervention and intentional delivery of intervention and intensity that is focused on individual needs. Questioning and inductive reasoning is very important. NILD educational therapy leads students to discover answers for themselves. Guided practice is used and systematic feedbacks is provided. Students' review is guided by questions. The therapist accesses prior experience and knowledge and uses research-based effective instructions. Self-regulation is one of the most important things that takes place while educational therapy is being done by children. Children learn to curb impulsivity, they build confidence for independent functioning. It also builds precision and clarity in verbal expression and builds associated skills. NILD educational therapy raises and therapist raises the expectations for cognitive and affective changes. We do not modify the work. We raise the child's cognitive abilities so he functions at a higher level. We build confidence for independent functioning and lifelong changes. So the LD student reaches their God-given potential and can realize their dreams. One of the many reasons why NILD educational therapy really works wonders is the rhythmic writing technique that we use. It involves cross-lateral integration of the brain through crossing over the mid-body line. This forms the synaptic connections in the brain and forms new neural pathways which work wonders in the process of learning. This is something that I have seen in all my students. I mean, I've seen how from not being able to function to being able to becoming independent learners is what NILD educational therapy really, really does. Now, NILD educational therapy also has another beautiful program which it has to offer for children between the age of 5 to 7 years. It is based both on clinical and statistical research. It is an early intervention program. They experience academic failure and emotional consequences associated with it. It is a two-part program. One is the search and the second one is the teach. So search is a scanning measure. It is designed to identify kindergarten children who are vulnerable to learning failures. A child is put through a 30-minute assessment in order to attend to the areas of predict learning difficulties in an individual child. It identifies the assets and deficits. It guides educational intervention. It determines the need of further intervention. It could be neurological, psychological, psychiatric, or social. It also provides the teachers and administrators with a profile of the child for proper planning of the content and timing of instructions. Now, teach is the second part of the program, which is an instructional method and consists of 55 tasks. Not necessarily all children go through the 55 tasks, but the teach program builds the pre-academic skills specific to reading, writing, and spellings. Now, the teach program is administered according to the individual search profile of a child. A child's strong and weak academic areas are taken into consideration and appropriate instructional tasks, basic search test. And they are visual, visual motor, auditory, body image, and intermodal skills. These all skills have been found to be basic to academic learning. They are teachable skills, which the vulnerable children can be helped to acquire through intervention. These are aimed towards developing those neuropsychological skills which have not been acquired through maturation or prior formal or informal experience. Now, Teach is provided by teachers who work with the children individually or in small groups, typically 3 to 4 times a week. Now, from my personal experience, I mean, I've had children who have had severe learning difficulties. I can cite an example where there was this little child who came to me who was, she just couldn't write. She had severe anxiety. The books would come out and she would get cramps in her stomach. She wouldn't be able to draw a line. And that's when parents got all the possible checks done and nothing came out. And this child came to me and we started her on to the Search and Teach program. And after we finished developing the pre-academic skills, we graduated her into an ILD, educational therapy. And you have to see that girl today. She's a confident learner. She loves reading, very enthusiastic reader. She loves writing. There was another child who came to me where he had his memory, his sequencing, his handwriting, his sound symbol association was very poor. Towards the end of the program, that kid was an independent learner. He could read. He used to look forward to reading. He used to bring books to the sessions that, ma'am, can we read these books? So that's the kind of change that we see when we work with, NILD, educational therapy with children. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Meghna ma'am. That was very enlightening. Special education is the practice of educating students in a way that addresses their individual differences and special needs. Ideally, this process involves the individually planned and systematically monitored arrangement of teaching procedures, adapted equipment and materials, and accessible settings. To tell us more about this, we have with us Nandita Saxena Paul. Nandita has done her MA English Literature and B.Ed. She is a special needs educator, a learning support and remedial teacher with over 35 years of teaching experience in both India and international schools, as well as in centers for children with special needs. He has conducted therapy and cognitive-based sessions for children and young adults with special needs using elements of ABT and conductive education. She has done training sessions and in-service programs for preschool teachers and counseling for parents and children with special needs. She conducts workshops on benefits of reading, the art of storytelling, creative writing, brain gym, multiple intelligences, and preferred learning styles, among others, and for all age groups. She strongly believes in community service. As part of an outreach program through Artsphere in Pune, she has conducted storytelling sessions for NGOs, Teach for India, Asharaya, Initiative for Children, and British Council Library, Pune. She is a strong advocate for inclusive education and suggests structural modifications for an inclusive classroom and provides guidance in making IEPs. She uses inclusive storytelling sessions for developing social, emotional, and communication skills, as well as creating awareness and empathy for children and young adults with special needs. She promotes sessions for regular kids, led by teenagers with special needs, who showcase their talents and skills so that they can be provided equal employment opportunities to them. Over to you, Nandita ma'am.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening, everyone. I hope I am audible. 1 second. Okay. I hope I'm audible and visible. Okay. First and foremost, thanks a lot, everyone, for joining in. I know it's Sunday evening, time to sort of not really party, but definitely not be very, very, serious. But yes, special education is a serious program, serious matter to talk on. And as Karen said, I have had the opportunity to work with children with special needs. Actually, I started off as a mainstream teacher like Meghna. I used to teach English language to children in grades 11 and 12. And it so happened that I moved to Dubai and I kind of didn't want to do that anymore. So I started to volunteer with some of the special needs centers there. And I think that's where I found my calling. And I started to work there. First I started to work as a support teacher. And when I started to work as a support teacher, I learned a lot. And then I decided that I wanted to work as a special educator. And that's when I started to work in a British school called Horizon School. And I started to provide learning support there. So I have had the good fortune of working as a special educator, as a remedial teacher, as a learning support. And finally, when I moved into a special needs center at Dubai, which was the Rashid Pediatric Therapy Center, I used to work with children with cerebral palsy, and I used to practice the program called Conductive Education, which is a brilliant program, which is a cognitive-based therapy program, which we can always talk about later. So what actually is special education? Now, as per the definition, special education is a practice used to educate students in a way that address their individual differences and special needs. But I don't think it just stops at education. I think, to me, and whatever I'm going to be sharing today is based on my experience. So it could be something that worked for me, maybe not working for the others. So it's not something that I would say, this is what special education is about. But this is what I think, for me, special education is about. So it is a holistic program for me. It is a method of teaching life skills that are functional. So for me, special education doesn't just mean, teaching the 3 hours. It is actually a holistic method of teaching life skills, which the child can then transfer into other, areas or any other skill that they want to develop. So what happens typically in a group learning environment? The children with learning disabilities, and I'm talking about learning disabilities and motor disorders more, because these are the children that have more cognitive abilities. So it's not to say that the other kids don't have, but this is where I think special education benefits cognitively. So children with learning disabilities or with motor disorders, they find it very challenging to process information or to decode it in a group setting. So that's when I think special education intervention is very, very important. And how is that important? What do you do in an intervention program there? You provide the child with a very, very secure space. You provide the child with the opportunity to focus on his or her challenges in a slower pace. So in a group session, what happens is, obviously the other children kind of sort of, they have their answers ready, but our child, the child with special needs or the child with LD or with motor disorders, obviously takes time to process that information. So what you do is you do a withdrawal session, you take the child out of that particular session, you take the child into some other, normally Horizon School where I worked, what we did was we had all our children into the mainstream classrooms, but we would take them out for language, for maths, and sometimes for science if it wasn't an experimental subject. Okay, but what we did was we always had these withdrawal sessions for language and for maths. So here what we do is special education therefore provides the child with the opportunity to focus on his or her challenges. So you work in a slower pace. It could be in an individual session. So sometimes I had a child doing a one-on-one with me. Other times I had maybe 1 or 2 children. So it could be individual, it could be group sessions that gives the child enough time to revisit his previous learning. That is more important in special education. What happens is in a typical mainstream classroom is you've got your children, say, I'll just give you an example. They are going to be doing single digit addition numbers, and I'm talking about younger children, but it could apply to older children also with, because chronological and academic, the ages or the chronological multiple, or the learning ages do differ for our children. So what you do is, in a mainstream classroom, you have a child, you have the classroom actually doing single digit addition numbers, and now they're ready to move on to double digit, or maybe 2 double digits and 1 single. But our child is not ready for it. So what you do is you take the child out for a withdrawal session. You get the child to revisit that previous knowledge of single digit addition numbers. Until such time that the child has not gained proficiency in that, you keep the child working on that. And then you give that child the opportunity to then start to move on to the new skill that he's going to develop, which is addition of 2 digits, or maybe 2 digits and 1 digit. So that is what I used to do in the schools that I worked in. I worked in a British school in Dubai. And what we did was, we used to have withdrawal sessions. We used to have the children come out into the rooms that were assigned to us, and we used to start working on the skills that they had already learned, use those skills, use new strategies to start building the other skills that they needed, which was, going on to the double addition of numbers. So, and then I think for me, what happens is, it's very important, and I can't sort of emphasize enough on this. Let us not just stick to teaching. Let us actually move from teaching into applying whatever the child has learned to a skill that he or she is going to use in his or her life functionally. And for me, that is very important. So whenever I do any kind of remediation program, or any kind of support, learning support program, I ensure that the skill is not just an academic skill, and the parents are not just happy that the child has learned an ABC or a 1, 2, 3 or whatever. I actually want to see the child use that skill in a new setting, and where that skill is meaningful, it's functional. So that is something that special education provides us, that opportunity. And I think we, Sudha, hi Sudha, I just saw you. Okay, so we as special educators, I think we are so lucky, Meghna and all of us who are into special education, we're also lucky because the kids trust us. They come to us, and they show a side of theirs to us, which I think very few people actually can see. So what happens is, when you are doing a special education program, when you're doing a one-on-one remediation program, or when you're doing a group session, or even when you're actually having an individual session alongside a mainstream classroom, which is what I used to do, the children give you that kind of, what should I say, they just kind of ensure that you are their support system. They have that comfort level with you, and what happens in that comfort level, the learning happens. For me, that is very, very important. My child should feel comfortable with me, and learning happens then, because what happens at that point of time, they show you the strengths that they have. And for me, I don't know about the other special educators, but for me, I think first and foremost, what I do is I find the strengths that the child has. I work on those strengths, and what I do is I use those strengths to work on the areas, the challenging areas, using that as my teaching tool. So I'll just give you an example. For example, there is a child who likes playing drums, djembe, and generally likes music, but doesn't show much interest in other skills. He doesn't want to learn language. He's not interested in numbers. He's not interested in going out. So we've started to use music as one of his strengths, and we've started to build skills around that. So he's now learning. He plays his music, then he goes to his language class. He plays his music, then he goes to his number class. He plays his music. He's willing to go outside and work with the other children. So for me, I think that is a very, very important point. What the children show is, in these sessions where you have your individual sessions or your group sessions or your withdrawal sessions, what you see is that the children show you their strengths, their preferred learning styles. So you have the visual, the auditory, and the kinesthetic. Then you have the multiple intelligences. We were told that there were 9, but I believe there are far more now, but I go by the 9 that I know. So what I do is I look at the dominant multiple intelligences of the children. It could be 1, or it could be more, and it could be even more. And I look at those as my teaching tools, and I work around those. So as I said, you could use music smart, you could use body smart, you could use number smart, or language smart, or word smart, whatever. And also, what happens in such programs, what happens, the child becomes very confident. The child is confident and knows that this is his strength or her strength. This is the skill, and they use that skill for their further learning. And of course, it is, I think for them, it is important to build their confidence. To me, I think that is the most important aspect of special education, self-esteem and confidence that the child needs to build the skills. All right. So now, as I've mentioned to you before, that I worked as a special needs educator at one of the leading centers in Dubai, as leading centers for special needs children, as well as I worked in a couple of schools in Dubai, mainstream schools where I did learning support. And I was also doing remediation program. So what I found was that there is a lot of similarity, of course, in special needs centers and in inclusive schools, but there are also certain sort of areas that inclusive schools miss out on. And I think what I did was, when I came back to India sometime back, I approached NCERT and I spoke to one of the special educators there. Am I running out of time? Am I running out of time?
Carry on, carry on.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Okay, so I met one of the special educators at the NCERT in Delhi, and I shared with her, and I will, maybe if time permits, I'll share some key pointers. I shared with her some of the classroom planning that we need to have in schools, especially inclusive schools, but I think not just inclusive schools, we should have that planning across all schools, because inclusive schools, we call them inclusive because they take in some children, but there are children who don't classify or don't have labels as special educators, children, but they still have a lot of issues. So in that, I'll just sort of briefly tell you what I had shared with them. So we do an IEP, as we all know, it is an individual educational plan for children. So they are great toolkits that actually give us idea of what are the specific learning styles of the children. So when we look at inclusive special education setup, so I'm talking about schools that are inclusive, I'm not talking about centers, because they are anyway equipped to do that. When we look at inclusive special education setups, these are some things that we need to keep in mind. So first and foremost, I think the physical learning environment. I might be hated for saying that, but many times I've been to schools that claim to be inclusive, but sadly, it's just on paper. And I think we should start correcting that. So the accessibility is a big issue. Sensory overload is a big issue for such schools. So when you're getting in a child who has already got a lot to deal with, and you add these two, problems, not having accessibility in the classroom, there's a sensory overload in every sense. And it's not just lights, it's a lot of sound, and it's a whole lot of spaces, This is something that we need to address. Then what are the kind of equipment and resources that we need to be having in, schools such as inclusive schools, where we are going to be practicing special education? So again, we have to be very specific to what disability we are going to be tackling and what kind of equipment we need. Something that I was very fortunate to use, and I think, I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, Sudha and Meghna, but use of augmentative alternative communication. I have used it so extensively in all of the centers that I've worked at. They are fantastic, and I'll probably show you one quickly here, because we may run out of time, I'm not sure. So this is something that one of my children, she used to use this to tell us her stories about the weekend. So it would be Friday and Saturday were weekends in Dubai. Sudha would know that. So this is something we used. It is called a board maker, and it is the way to communicate and to sort of tell us what you did on your weekend. So we used to use this with our children, and this is how they were communicating. And these were children who were either non-verbal or with very little sort of language. So this is something that I have used extensively. So I would say, if there is an inclusive setup in the schools, please go for the ASC board maker. It is a fantastic tool. Your furniture should be such that it is geared to take the child's sensory issues in consideration. So some things that I shared with this lady at NCERT, and I think they have used some of it. Then I have seen, when I've been to such inclusive schools, the body language makes such a huge difference. The body language of the people around you, the body language of parents, the body language of the teachers. I think we need to correct that. Our children are already quite sort of very, very overwhelmed with everything, and then not to be able to sort of make any connection. I think that is also something that we need to look at. Then something that I also used extensively, and again, as I keep reiterating, these are all my experiences. This is all something that I'm sharing, not necessarily, every special educator may be doing that, maybe or maybe not, I'm not sure. I use a lot of VAC method of teaching, which is the visual, auditory, and the kinesthetic. I base most of my assessments on multiple intelligences. I do a lot of brain gyms. I do brain gym as a I don't do it just with the parents or with the children. I also do it with myself, because I find that this is something that is really, really motivating. Then I also use a lot of handwriting without tears. I think that it's a tool. I'm sure I probably have it here. These are some of the things that, okay, I'm technically challenged. These are some of the things that the occupational therapists use, and this is to teach the children how to begin to write. So this is something that I'm using extensively. Then, of course, very important for me, and if I'm using inclusive schools to go and teach a child there, I use a lot of visual timetables. I use a lot of sequencing of events, because the children, I think they learn because once they know what they have to do, and the sequencing is there in front of them, and especially this works very well when you're training your children for toilets. So you're doing a toilet training, and when I say toilet training, it doesn't mean potty training. It's when the child wants to go to the toilet in a mainstream school, in an inclusive school, and doesn't know the procedure. So this is something that I have used quite a lot. And then, of course, I have used tactile resources, keeping in mind sensory issues for all the children. So a lot of tactile resources I have used. And of course, all of us, we use a differentiated curriculum. But again, when I say differentiated curriculum, all of my IEPs, and I think I'm very, very sort of fortunate that I've had some very, very good head teachers and very good colleagues in Dubai, the center where I worked at, who really helped me to, put together my IEPs, because very honestly, I was not very, very good at it. But, over the years that I worked with them, I learned how to make my IEPs very functional. And end of the day, that is what I'm advocating. Make your IEPs very, very functional. And the last thing that I like about special education is, and I have seen that, like Meghna was saying, there are many success stories. In my, tenure as a special ed from 1997, actually, I started to teach in 1984. I'm 61 today. I started to teach in 1984, and I started doing my special education teaching from 97 up to now. So many success stories, and I give the credit to the children. Yes, we are instrumental in getting them there, but I give the credit to the children for trusting us, for getting them there where they actually should be. So their potential has been there. So what happens in special education? They start to learn to control their anger, their depression, their low self-esteem, their frustration, their anxiety, a whole lot of things. And something that quickly I'll do, and you can always tell me that your time is running out, but what are the areas that I want to look at when I advocate special education? The areas that I want to look at would be, of course, these are the general ones which we normally do, which is building fine and gross motor skills, and building communication skills, language development, and speech development. Of course, motor skills as well, oromotor skills as well, because we also doing a lot of breathing. And the conductive education that I used to practice at Rashid Center for Children with CP, that involves a lot of breathing. So the children learn to breathe the right way, and therefore they learn to also walk the correct way. That is something that I learned when I was doing conductive education. Then processing information. See, let us not just keep special education as a teaching tool and then say, okay, this child has moved from grade 4 to grade 5 or grade wherever, but has not transferred those skills onto a new skill. What is the point of then having that skill? So I definitely wait for the child to process whatever information he or she has learned into a new skill, transfer it, and into a new setting. So it has to be used there as well. And of course, the emotional and social and psychological well-being. Imagine having to do all that and all by yourself, learning to be independent. What a great feeling it gives to the child. And of course, the last and the most important thing, you as Meghna has also mentioned, using the adaptive equipment and the assistive devices, which are the AACs that I am using. What I have seen, and especially in Horizon School, where I taught, that was the inclusive school, and at the Rashid Center, what I saw was that with all these teaching and learning tools that we had, the outcome was tremendous. The children actually performed way beyond their level of potential. We came with certain sort of ideas about this is what their end range is, but they actually did a lot more. So imagine the kind of sort of self-esteem that they had for themselves, that rush that they must have had, seeing how successful they have been. So quickly, I will just show you some of the stuff that I've been using. Do I have the time, or you want me to stop, Karen?
We'll give you 2 minutes more.
Okay, 2 minutes more. So here's my 2 minutes. So these are some of the things that I've been using with my children. So is it right? Yes. So these are questions, and these are, children, we don't even sort of verbalize them. They look at it and we ask them questions and they can then answer. So these are again made from the board marker that I'm using. Then this is something that I'm also using for the children to teach, again from the board marker that I've made. So there's the subject, there's the verb and the object. Again, for the non-verbal children, it can also be used for children who are not that, this is something that I'm using as their, something that they can identify with. You can stick it on their desks if you want. Then I'll show you something that I'm using. Yes, and I showed that to Karen, but I'll show you also. Now, this is something that we were using for one of our non-verbal child with quadriplegia, and he used to use this for his learning. So I hope you can see them, guys. I'm not sure. So this is something that they were using, and this was a placemat. This was called a placemat. So what we did was we put it on his tabletop, and if he needed something, he would point at it. He would try and verbalize if he could, which was a little difficult for him, but he would point at it, and he would also point at the alphabet that it began with. So this is something that really worked, and he was able to communicate with us. If he wanted to tell us what he did over the weekend on a Friday and a Saturday, he would use this also to tell us. So this was something that was fantastic. Then this was something that I used again, our weekend fun. So you bring those little cards that you want to, you can start sticking them, or if the child can verbalize, you can get the child to verbalize. This is something that I made on my own. This is called a reading window. I have another one which I can hopefully find. So just use these, for children who have a lot of problems reading, use these as your reading windows. You can cover, you can have a single sort of a cutout, and you can use these for reading windows. Okay. The last and not the least. All right. Okay. This also I use a lot extensively. Okay. I need to do it the right way up. So I use these again before we start with any kind of sort of reading, writing, or any kind of, which involves any kind of sort of verbalization. We use this as our practice board. So yeah, I have a whole lot more, but then I have to give Sudha the time as well. All right, thanks guys. Thank you so much for listening patiently.
Thank you so much, Nandita ma'am. That was very valuable inputs and amazing apparatus that you use. I hope we'll see more of it sometime.
As they say.
We go on to remedial programs. They're designed to close the gap between what a student knows and what he's expected to know. They often target reading or math skills. At a basic level, remediation or reteaching means teaching again content that students previously failed to learn for whatever reason. Ideally, remediation or reteaching is done early in the learning process before additional skills are layered in or more formal mastery tests or summative exams are administered. Right, Sudha? That's your job. You've been doing it for a long time. Yeah, remediation strategies are one type of intervention. Effective remediation involves assessing the student's needs, providing interventions, and evaluating student outcomes. Successful remediation programs adjust the instruction based on students' response to the intervention. Now over to you. Sudha Nair, educator, inclusion, Sudhi Learning Center. Have been in the field for special education for more than 2 decades, so with the last 15 years in inclusive education. She passed out after Passed out of the B.Ed special course of SNDT University, Mumbai in 1995. He has worked in various settings, specializes in working with parents to offer the most viable program for the child and coordinate with respective schools for the same. He's a member of the AISRV and ISVA network associated with social role valorization. He has conducted training workshops for parents and teachers. Please tell me what is AISRV and ISVA. What does it stand for?
Okay, so hi Karen, you want me to do the full forms first and I'll greet you all first?
Whatever, that's okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So Karen, it's nice to be here in Buddy Center, and having known you for a long time, and having had those talks, and when Buddy Center was just a thought and an idea in your head, and then the planning, the designing, and now it's flourishing. So it's so nice to see you and see Buddy Center and all the kids. Some of those kids, when they were small, they were with me, and now they're young adults and they are there with you. So it's kind of like a handover, to Karen. So that's so nice, and all the best for whatever endeavors you all have for 2021.
Thank you so much.
Nandita and I also go back a long way from Dubai. And I was going through, mentally through Horizon School when she was mentioning Horizon School. And one thing when I had been there, what I had noticed, which was very significant, is I think they had these, every school has, what do you call it? Bulletin board pe lagate na charts. Okay, they had charts you could feel and touch and you could actually interact with. So it's not just the visual, so a lot of multisensorial and movement learning also, I think they believed in. So that was something amazing, a different mainstream school. And Meghna, I think I saw her for the first time when we had that special educators powwow, right? Geeta Dalal had.
Yes.
So yeah, and it was nice meeting you, and I'm sure now we will keep meeting more often. Yeah. So thank you, Karen, again. And the thing is, now you've put me last. So all that remains for me is to have my cup of coffee. And I'm thankful for it because I had a wonderful time listening to Meghna, the structure that she had with us, because that's what we do. So I was seeing my job there very neatly structured, especially that, the bricks you had, the bricks are all over the place. And then you go with the base. So the base is even before reading, writing, and maths, right? The base, and then the confidence, emotions, academics, and then went on to Nandita, who so beautifully told us that it's not just the structure. She explored the other aspect of it, the emotions that we bring into it, the spirit that we bring into it, and when we work that way, I'm sure Nandita, Meghna, and Karen, there's so much that we learn, right? So special education, whether it's remedial, whether you're an educational therapist, special educator, inclusive educator, remedial teacher, whatever it is, the technicalities of what you're called. Ultimately, it is not so much of teaching. The first lesson you learn is not, it's not so much about teaching, it's teaching learning. So then you get your concept of you being a facilitator, that you're facilitating learning. And then it is as you start, you really get into your job, you realize that, who's learning more over here? Am I learning more? Is my student learning more? So it's a kind of, it's a beautiful synergy. And now after about 20 to 25 years in the field, I can say without a doubt that my best teachers have been my students. I've had excellent mentors along the way. I mean, I can't deny that. Excellent mentors, and being in Dubai meant that Genesis had a lot of training workshops. So you had people from all over, from India, from America, UK, Australia, all these stalwarts, of their professions used to come there. So they were excellent mentors. But over and above all of them, it's my students who have taught me the best. And the naughtier the student, the more you learned. Okay, so in remedial, if you're looking strictly at remedial, you get the naughtiest people. Okay, because they English, math, science, and all this, that like one big mystery there, the way it is taught in school. In school, it is just very linguistic based, right? So it's just a linguistic based learning, whereas these are people, okay, who belong to this world of multisensorial learning, multiple intelligences, and they are not catered to in school, unfortunately. And the thing is that any school, I mean, if a teacher, any teacher, let's go beyond the labels, what we label ourselves. If we recognize there exists more than one intelligence, then we also need to recognize there exists more than one way of teaching, one way of learning. And that learning experience becomes so much more enriching for each and every child. Each and every child. Any accommodation till date that I have recommended, and I'm sure Nandita and Meghna will, can relate to that. Sometimes it's ended up benefiting the rest of the class more than it has our child. It's there. So people just need to recognize that this is not special needs, it's not remediation. It's about children, how they learn best, and what you do to enrich learning for one child benefits each and every child in that classroom. And that's why technically, if we come to a definition of remediation or remedial teaching, then it is basically if your child doesn't learn the way you teach, then you teach the way that child learns and extend that learning. So if you want a technical definition of remediation, it is that. Otherwise, if you ask me, it is just hair splitting, whether it's educational therapy, special education, remediation. What we do is the same. When Meghna is talking, I know that's what I'm doing. When Nandita is talking, I know that's what I'm doing. Right? So each of us knows that this is what we're all doing. And if you are going to define remedial as reading, writing, arithmetic, okay, there's something which I tell parents also. See, I cannot isolate the reading, writing, arithmetic from the child. It's not that you pull out the reading center of the brain and the writing center and all that. I mean, all that technical knowledge does matter, that why a child is learning a different way. That's a different story, right? But you really cannot separate that from the body of the child, first of all, from the heart and mind. So even when you say remedial, it's not just like a tuition say, okay, this problem you don't know, let me look at it, let me teach you in a different way. So we use a lot of blocks when we do addition, subtraction, or basic maths, beads, buttons, anything. I used to collect all these pens, all empty pens. I have such a collection of, useless pens, because this helps me in making groups and learning, adding and everything else that you need to do in maths. I'm not going to get into any of the, the alternative strategies, because Nandita has done such a beautiful job of doing it. Right? I'm so thankful to you, Nandita. I don't have to talk about that.
No, we would love to know what you are doing. So let's also have that. Come on.
It's very similar, no? See, when you talk about communication, the AECs, and now because we have the apps. When we started off, we didn't have apps, so the board maker program and all the PEX cards and whatever clip art, you keep using that. But now you have apps like Jello and Avaz. So that's something that has made everybody's life a little simpler. The only problem in using an alternative and augmentative communication device is the attitude or the mental barrier that I don't want my child to be seen holding that. Okay, but what happens is that communication is a basic human right. So you can't deny that from your child. So, talking is not the only way. Like today in my story session that I have, storytelling, I said, let's all mute and we'll just communicate with gestures and our face, because speech is not the only way of communicating. And since all my classes, my group classes, my summer camps, they are inclusive. So I never advertise it as for special needs children or for general. It's like for everyone. And it's very organic, because the child is seeing, every child is seeing there's that child with a mobility issue, but she can dance, she can do movements. There is that child who has a speech issue, speech is not clear, but she is able to communicate. And they all develop that patience, because it's a safe space that you create, right? So remediation is not just about the 3 R's. And it is also not just about that individual child who is your student for a very specific purpose. It's also, how do you prepare the world? How do you prepare the world for that child? Right? How do you sensitize a community? It's not going to happen just by talking about it or there's been a lot of talking, buildings will get illuminated and we all have each of our days. We have dyslexia day and we have epilepsy day and we have CP day and we have autism day and everything. To begin with, yes, it was necessary because awareness is the first step. But we have gone so much beyond awareness now. It's time for action. And if we, in our individual basis also, while we are teaching children, okay, if we bring this element into it, okay, that there is a place for everybody and everybody deserves to be in this place. Okay, so while teaching the reading, the writing, the arithmetic stories, you bring this in, right? And you use your training, because your training tells you what is the base, what are the concepts I'm talking about. Okay, is the child at a concrete operational stage or at an abstract operational stage? So that's where you use your training to deliver a message. Okay, because ultimately the 3 R's, where is it going to lead us? We need to be good human beings. We need to have good communities, for especially for our students, because our students are very vulnerable. Okay, we really don't look at them as less than or different or anything like that. Okay, but the fact is they are vulnerable. So when you're doing remediation or special education or educational therapy, you also underline, you need to put that message across, and you have your students with you now, and you have other students, so you mold their minds, right? So along with a responsibility to educate the child, every remedial or special educator, since we work so intensively with children, part of our remediation that we do, part of our special education that we do, is also work on communities. And it is like taking that holistic nature of education a bit more, giving it an extension to the community, right? We all understand holistic education, so the brain, body, heart, mind, everything, right? But also extend that ambit that there is a community that my student goes back into. Okay, whether it's that classroom, whether it's the playground, whether it's a work set up later, there is that community. So in my lessons, right, in my interactions with the student, with the siblings, with a group of students of mixed abilities, mixed ages, how do I frame my lesson such that not in a very preachy manner, but through stories, or through even a maths problem that I devise for my remedial. Okay, see, now I have 2 young adults of mine, my daughters at home, and so they sensitize me to a lot, especially nomenclature, because gender is not just binary. When we grew up, there wasn't that much awareness, so gender is binary. So the sums, you will say there are 40 students, my favorite sum, 40 students in class, 25 are girls. I always make the girls number higher. I used to do that always. There'll be 25 girls, the rest are boys. How many are boys? Okay, now I can't have my sums as binary, right? So while doing remedial, then you bring it in, you bring they in. They is the preferred nomenclature, so you bring that into your remedial session. So as a remedial teacher, you also have to be so sensitive and aware as to what is happening around the world, because it is through these small things that awareness gets created and it gets internalized. Yeah, I am not talking so much about the prerequisites. Meghna has done a beautiful job of just showing us, especially through those visuals and her explanation. So I'm not going into the what are the prerequisites of remediation. She's already dealt with it. Nandita has opened out the ambit of what is special education. So I'm just going beyond that to now how the community, right? And like I said, our job, which was first to facilitate, now it is to learn so much, because if I have to teach a child something, right, I myself have to learn so much of it, right? I have to teach profit and loss. Okay, I need to know that it is not about getting the child to mug up the formula. Okay, so what is it? Profit upon cost price into 100. I need to go so many steps back. That does she understand ratio and proportion? Does she understand what is an equation? What does percent mean? Okay, so even I need to learn how to teach this as well, because lots, you know, in that 1 year of training you get, it is impossible for even your teachers to cram in all that. So you have to be constantly learning yourself. So your success and success as a remedial in the sense that how far you are able to deliver, you know, a solution to your student. So your success as a remedial teacher depends on how much you're willing to learn, how much you're willing to understand that I know nothing. So it is from a place of humility. When you approach remediation, it's from a place of humility and a place of being a learner, not the expert. So in remedial, in my remedial sessions or my special education sessions, it's always a partnership, especially when it is with dyslexic children or children with dysgraphia or dyscalculia, ADHD. It is like I establish it with them that we are partners. I'm not going to be spoon feeding you. I'll also learn from you. Tell me what you're going to teach me. And this is what, you know, maybe we will explore together. So that is how you know, create a safe space, or else you give that child that control and power. You don't sit in a position of power. It's not about personal control. I'm the teacher and you will listen to me. This is the way, the formula says this, do this. These are the steps. Or this happened in history first and then this happened, and you've got to just, you know, let's just find a way of mugging up. Yeah, it's about instructional control. It's about understanding what is the sitting tolerance of a child. You know, if a student is able to say only sit for 10 minutes, you're going to break up your sessions into those, you know, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. Like Nandita said, play the djembe drums, no, and come back. So, and brain gym comes in very handy here. So you do a cross body exercise, right? And Nandita, in between, I used to do the cross body exercise only to kind of demonstrate it to the child. Okay, because when the child is doing cross body, then I'm scribbling something like, you know, for the next time, prep for the next time, or how did this go? Recently, what happened is, after so many years of doing cross body with these kids, I was so tired, I was bored, I was, you know, irritated. So I said, okay, let me just do a cross body. And I just did cross body and I was walking, doing that. And then I sat back really so refreshed. So I think we should practice what we preach, right?
Yes, absolutely. Agree with you. Totally.
So, yeah, so that's the thing. And one thing about being remedial is that, see, a lot of children come with the knowledge when they come to you for remedial. When I'm talking about children with specific learning difficulties, I'm not talking about right now children with cognitive impairments or communication delays or challenges. See, they come with the awareness that they are not doing as well as the other children. They can see what's happening. You know, they get maximum redos or corrections. They don't get the sums. Their handwriting is not accepted by teacher or by parents. They can see what the partner right next to them is doing and what they are doing. So they as it is come with that trepidation. So very important, before you even start, is you have that a SWOT analysis kind of a thing. Those who have done MBA know what is a SWOT analysis, no? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threat, that quadrant. So you sit and do that with them, and you do yours as well, so that the child knows that even you are not sitting there in a space of expertise. So as a remedial teacher, as that is one of the first things. And I also suggest to parents that they do that, because parents are forever telling their child, oh, you need to work hard, you need to make your handwriting proper, if you write in cursive, and then things like that. But then even the parent, it's dual, because parent also needs to know, excuse me, you are also not the class topper now. So but you want your child to be the class topper. There are many things even you don't know. You have your strengths and you have your weaknesses, so that kind of puts everybody on a level playing field. So first you have to create that for your child, then you go into the prerequisites and everything else as far as remediations work. Nandita said about IEPs. So anybody who's done special education knows that IEP is the holy grail. So individualized educational program. So whether we have a formal document or not, or else it's a little bit informal, okay, in the formatting, that is, none of us can work without an IEP, because it has to be geared for that child. Even if two children with learning difficulties come to you at the same time, same age, same class, same everything, both the needs are going to be different. The underlying cause will be the same, but what needs to be addressed is going to be different. You're using your tools. Yeah, you're using your strategies, you're using your tools, but it has to be molded to that specific child. Also, what happens is sometimes remediation, now the thing is the child goes to school, the child is doing homework with the tutor or the parent. The best possible alternative is not what is going to be possible to be followed at home. So you also have to have your plan B and your plan C. So your IEP may not be your plan A. It could be plan B, plan C, plan D, whatever. Okay, sometimes you have to reconcile with the fact that the follow-up that is happening with the child may not be the best, but then you give the next best, or you tailor it to the situation of the family as well. And in my sessions, parents are always present. That's a prerequisite. So I do not work even online. I work in the presence of parents so that parent knows how to guide the child. Otherwise, everything hinges on them getting the child back to me for the next session, right? So parent training, absolute must. Parents have to be on the same page as you. And I mean, that's a bit about how the sessions have to go. Now the IEP is like, I mean, when you work in a school, it's a nightmare because you have formats. When you work for yourself, you have your runarounds. You know, I have my rectangles and squares and ovals. Those are my code, you know, for the goals and where are we with the goals and the specific objective. I know what I have exactly have to do that day. And I have a little more flexibility because the specific objective can change on me on any particular day and I can change it, right? I don't have to justify to somebody, ye likha tha, abhi ye kyun kar rahe ho? Right? So that's one major thing when you work for yourself versus you work for a school. So you have your goals, you have your activities, everything. But at the end of the day, I mean, why do you have these goals and these activities for the child? It is because that child is in a role somewhere, no? In school, he's in the role of a student. And all the signifiers that go with being a student, being able to attend, being able to sit, being able to follow instructions, being accepted as a learner among students. If it's at home, it's the role of a child who's, say, going to help. I won't say help with household chores. Household chore is his responsibility, whatever the age, you know. So be part of that, what is going on in your house. When you're out in the community, right, you have a responsibility, you have a role there, either as a neighbor, as a peer, as a friend, as somebody in the playground, or, you know, maybe help somebody up. There are so many roles. All these goals of ours and the spirit and the attitude with which we work with our children, it is for the roles, right? There is no point in us even teaching 2 plus 2 is 4 if we are not helping that child see a role. You know, he has to come into those roles, and these are valued roles as a student. Like for example, this was when I was in Dubai, and my student, she was the same age as my younger daughter. They went to the same school, same grade, separate sections. Now, what happened is I had to teach her actually phonics. So that's why we use multisensorial methods. For instance, like C, her mother would put a plastic, make a flashcard with a plastic wire. So you touch, is it C? Am I making C? Okay. You touch C. Okay. So you have the visual. She's seeing C, auditory, her mother is saying C, kinesthetic, moving along the C, tactile, she's touching, it's a plastic wire. So rather than just write a pencil C, you know, a pencil, there's no tactile input to it as such, the ordinary pencil that is. So using a multisensorial method there. And what was beautiful about that is once when she went to the supermarket, she picked up a carrot and she wrote a C on it. It was that effective. And because it was also done at home, and it was done in a way meaningful to her, she immediately, the generalization also happened. It was the most beautiful thing for me to hear, that she picked up a carrot and she wrote C. You know, it's very exciting for me. This happened 20 years back, I think. Yeah. Now the thing is, we were at that stage. Also, she had you know, I was working on her communication. That was the most important thing. Okay, she was in KG2 and she had to do maths and writing and this and that and the other, but the most important significant thing was communication, getting through to her, and she having a means to get through to us. That she was verbal, but not using it for communication. So that was what I was focused on, not so much the math. But then her teacher, because I also coordinate with schools, so they do tell me that work on these goals. I always ask the teachers in school that what do you want me to work on, because once I work on what the teacher wants, my student is recognized as a student there, capable of learning, right? That's the role. So the teacher said, she doesn't know that after 37 comes 38, you please teach her that. And I was like, oh my God, that is the last on my priority, that after 37 comes 38. She needs to be able to communicate. But I said, no, now I have told teacher that whatever you say, I will do, and I will do it. So I did that. And we left communication goals for a while, 37 ke baad 38. In the most meaningful way, blogs, ye wo. And the teacher was very happy. And she realized that this child is also my student, the teacher's student in class. She's not somebody else's student. Somebody else will do the work, that this child is capable of learning. So now she had expectations of her. Earlier, she didn't have expectations. It was more a frustration that how many times I've repeated and done it, but she doesn't get it. Okay, so it was a frustration which is now turned into an expectation that here is a student who's capable of learning. So just by virtue of taking inputs from the teacher, and though it was not significant as far as I'm concerned, as far as the parent is concerned, but just taking that input from her gave that student, gave that child a role of a student rather than somebody who is not learning. Then the next was assembly, there's that, a lot of goals which she gave. So which is why we can't have goals without roles. Okay, the most important part is what role, what valued role. That was a very valued role. Once she has a valued role of a student, that teacher is also going to think of alternative strategy. She is going to reach out so that she also learns just as everybody else. And valued roles is the whole crux of SRV, which is social role valorization. Okay, so SRV says that if we talk specifically in terms of disability, because of the disability, okay, there are a lot of wounding that happens to an individual. Okay, the wounds are of, say, rejection. Yeah, that's the very first thing. No, even in families, sometimes the mother is blamed or the daughter-in-law is blamed. There's a lot of wounding there. You didn't look after the child, or you're neglecting the child, or you didn't eat apple or bananas when you were pregnant or whatever. And it sounds so ridiculous, but then it's true. Like the most ridiculous things are told to parents. The wounding starts there. The child is rejected, doesn't get friends. There's so many issues we all know. So the individual gets successfully devalued and is denied every role. Then the role of a student or the role of a valued member of family. Okay, शादी पे आना, लेकिन उसको ना घर पे ही बिठा के आना किसी के साथ. Right? So the role of a family member is also not there. We are all born into at least one role of belonging to a family, right? So even that role is not there. So SRV tells us how we can, create valued roles for individuals so that they don't get devalued and can participate in community, in employment, in education, and whatever they have to. And we have a network here of professionals who work along that line, which is the All India SRV group. SRV stands for Social Role Valorization. AISRV is the All India SRV group, and ISRVA is the International Association. So that is roles and SRV remediation. Anything else? I mean, if you have any questions now, because I think I've kind of exhausted what, the crux of what I had to say. And it's been very nice. I think the flow, even though it was not intended, because Meghna gave the structure, so wo samajh mein aaya. Then Nandita gave the more of an expositionary and all the examples and everything. And then we came on to roles, right? No goals without roles. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Sudha. That was very informative, very valuable information for all of us. So I think we have gone way past our time, but couldn't help it. It was very, very
Blame Nandita.
important.
Blame Nandita. No, but Nandita, what you showed was...
Everybody's information was so valuable. I'm sure everybody required
I'm
this.
a senior
This is
citizen,
really
you can't
important.
blame me.
So yes, we shall conclude here. So IEP, yes, cornerstone of special education, very important. I think this would help put in place learning goals as well as the special services and supports the school may provide to help the child meet these goals. Developing an IEP for your child is crucial for effectiveness in special education. Every parent know and understand their child better than anyone else. I keep saying that. So it's so important that their insights can help ensure that their child receives the services, the supports needed to succeed in school. So yes, thank you so much, Sudha, Meghna, Nandita,
Thank
for everything you for today evening's very valuable inputs by all
Thank
of
you
you.
for asking.
No goals without roles. Remember, no goals without roles.
Absolutely. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, Karen, for having us over.
Have a nice
Bye.
evening,
You too.
everyone.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye, Nandita. Bye, Meghna.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye,
Karen.
guys.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye.